Hurricanes are one of the most unrestrained and destructive phenomena of Mother Nature. Winds exceeding 200 miles per hour and waves as high as 10 feet can obliterate entire cities in a matter of days. We will tell you about the most insane hurricanes in all of human history, which left behind so much death and devastation that it's challenging to fathom. And at the end, you will see a storm that once it reached the shore, virtually wiped out 500,000 people. To understand the danger of hurricanes, let's first familiarize ourselves with the system used to classify them, as well as learn why they are given all human names. In 1973, scientists Robert Simpson and Herbert Saffer developed a special table that determined potential losses incurred during severe weather. It was based on wind speed and the volume of storm surges. It begins with the first category, where only minor damage occurs to trees and shrubs, and ends with the fifth category, when the hurricane literally wipes out everything in its path. At this level, many buildings are immediately destroyed, and the only option is a complete evacuation. As for the names, it's relatively straightforward. Names were given to various atmospheric phenomena during World War II, when attempts were made to monitor typhoons in the Pacific. To avoid confusion among numerous storms, scientists began giving them names such as those of their mothers-in-law and wives. After the war, the U.S. Meteorological Agency created a special list of names. Each year, the names followed the alphabetical order. If the first hurricane of the season is named Anna, the second one will be Betsy. Ivan. Hurricane Ivan struck Gulf Shores, Alabama on September 16, 2004, and was immediately classified as Category 3. Although it was not the highest level of danger, Ivan is still considered one of the most destructive hurricanes in U.S. history. Why? It persisted for too long for a natural event of this kind. Ivan repeatedly intensified and weakened over several weeks, reaching Category 5 strength 3 times and causing colossal devastation. The storm devastated the coastlines of Mississippi, Alabama, and the Florida Panhandle, generating waves over 10 feet high. It nearly obliterated the western tip of Cuba in September, and then weakened to Category 4 as it entered the Gulf of Mexico. On the morning of September 16th, Ivan made landfall on the Gulf Coast with sustained winds of 120 miles per hour and a storm surge of 14 feet. Despite rapid weakening, it continued to pour tons of rain and even spawned tornadoes in the southeastern United States. On September 18th, the cyclone moved over Virginia and then looped back over South Florida before heading back into the Gulf of Mexico. In the end, Ivan was responsible for the deaths of 57 people in the United States and an additional 67 in Grenada, Jamaica, the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, and the Cayman Islands. The estimated damage exceeded $27 billion. If this sounds like a substantial figure to you, believe me, it's just the beginning of our list. Andrew. This powerful Category 5 hurricane struck the southern district of Dade County, Florida, primarily affecting the area south of Miami in August 1992. The storm season that year had started relatively calmly, with minimal activity. Even Hurricane Andrew was initially considered quite weak when it broke out in the Atlantic Ocean. However, by the time Andrew reached the Bahamas, the first storm of the season had wind gusts exceeding 160 miles per hour. When the hurricane reached Florida, Andrew devastated dozens of homes, with its wind speed reaching 141 miles per hour. A storm surge of 17 feet turned the streets into waterways, teeming with debris from homes and cars. The storm also left drivers stranded for several weeks, as 9,500 road signs and important intersections in the county were destroyed. With an estimated cost of $27.3 billion, Andrew was the most expensive hurricane in U.S. history for over a decade until Hurricane Katrina hit Louisiana in 2005, causing even greater damage as later calculated by insurance companies. One of the positive legacies of Andrew is that the South Florida Building Code was completely revised, and now all new homes must have storm shutters or impact-resistant glass. Increased requirements for roofing nails also later saved thousands of homes. In total, Andrew claimed the lives of 61 people in Florida and the Caribbean. The storm left over 125,000 homes and 160,000 people homeless. And now let's talk about a hurricane whose name is known all over our planet. Katrina. This terrifying hurricane with a beautiful feminine name resulted in catastrophic consequences in the Gulf of Mexico coastal area. The disaster nearly wiped out the infrastructure of Mississippi and Louisiana. The death toll was around 2,000 people. Damage was also inflicted on neighboring regions. New Orleans was submerged, which later escalated into a humanitarian crisis. Most of the population found themselves on the streets because their homes were destroyed or flooded. In cities with minor damage, there was an upsurge in crime. Looting, lawlessness and theft reached unprecedented levels, with people defending their property with firearms. It took the government several months to finally gain control of the situation. 40% of hurricane-related deaths were due to drowning. The federal government's slow response to the plight of the victims led to allegations of incompetence and even deliberate disregard for the poor and African Americans. In total, Hurricane Katrina claimed 1,833 lives, and the country lost $161 billion. This is why it is considered the costliest hurricane in U.S. history. Labor Day Hurricane. This storm is simply known as the Labor Day Hurricane in honor of its date of occurrence, as the practice of naming hurricanes only began in 1953. The storm broke out on August 29, 1935, long before the advent of modern weather tracking technologies, including the regular use of Doppler radar, which predicts where a storm might start and end. No one could warn residents as the hurricane approached. Many victims anxiously awaited an evacuation train that never came because it was washed off the tracks. The damage amounted to almost $2 billion when adjusted for modern currency, and about 500 people perished. It was the strongest hurricane ever recorded in the Atlantic until the appearance of Hurricane Gilbert. Irma. Irma is a tropical hurricane that caused massive damage. It began forming in August 2017 near Cape Verde in the Atlantic. In September, it reached Category 5, the highest level of threat. The major destruction occurred in the Bahamas, where nearly half of the population lost their roofs. After that, Irma moved on to Cuba. Havana was nearly completely submerged. Meteorologists recorded wave heights of up to 20 feet and wind gusts reached 190 miles per hour. After Cuba, the hurricane turned towards Florida. Authorities had to evacuate millions of citizens. When the gusts reached Miami, the city was practically deserted. After wreaking havoc there, Irma's strength diminished, and within a couple of days, the threat level dropped to a minimum. 150 people lost their lives, and the damage was almost $77 billion. Harvey. Another tropical storm formed on August 17, 2017, and it was named Harvey. The storm caused flooding in Texas, resulting in 80 deaths. The flooding in Houston was severe as Harvey lingered over the area for several days, dumping up to 50 inches of rain in some places. This amount of rainfall was equivalent to what the city typically receives in an entire year, and it all fell in just 4 days. Houston suffered significant destruction, leading to a surge in crime with looting and lawlessness. The government even had to impose a curfew, and the military patrolled the city to protect the property of evacuated people. It took $8 billion to address the aftermath, and experts estimated that full recovery would require around $70 billion. Gilbert. Assessing a hurricane can be done in various ways, whether it's wind speed and precipitation or the loss of life and property damage. Hurricane Gilbert, however, was one of the largest in terms of size in the Atlantic basin. Its diameter reached 500 nautical miles. The storm formed near the Cape Verde Islands off the west coast of Africa, where some of the most powerful hurricanes in history originate. Transforming into a Category 5 storm in September 1988, Gilbert literally swept across the entire island of Jamaica, damaging approximately 80% of residential buildings. The hurricane even moved on to the Cayman Islands in Mexico, among other areas, before weakening and entering Texas, manifesting as a series of tornadoes. The storm resulted in 318 deaths, with 200 fatalities due to flooding in Mexico and 28 people killed when a Cuban shrimp boat collided with a ship. The damage associated with Gilbert exceeded roughly $5.5 billion. Hurricane Maria. Maria became the second Category 5 hurricane to hit the United States in 2017. Arriving just 2 weeks after the brutal Hurricane Irma, Maria was even more destructive as it traversed the same areas, devastating infrastructure and buildings. Maria made landfall on the tiny island of Dominica on September 18, 2017, with wind speeds of 175 miles per hour, 281 kilometers per hour. It then moved on to Guadeloupe and the US Virgin Islands before nearly completely destroying the island of Puerto Rico in September. Afterward, Maria weakened to Category 4. The initial death toll from Hurricane Maria was 146 people. However, it was believed that the real figures were much higher, and the Puerto Rican government conducted a more comprehensive investigation in August 2018, nearly a year after the catastrophe. The final death toll was around 3,000 people. Moreover, the cost of the damage was estimated to be at least $1.31 billion for Dominica and over $90 billion for Puerto Rico. Even after so many years, the island has not fully recovered, and hundreds of thousands of residents have permanently relocated to the US mainland. Hurricane Mitch. Hurricane Mitch may not have received as much attention as some other storms in the US, but the number of deaths and destruction it caused surpassed some of its more famous counterparts. This slow-moving hurricane seemed to stall as it reached Honduras in October 1998. There it released up to 4 inches of rain per hour for 2 days, triggering massive landslides and deadly floods along its path. It was confirmed that at least 11,000 people were killed and more than 12,000 went missing by the end of 1998, with the true number of casualties possibly never to be known. Furthermore, approximately 2.7 million people were left homeless. Mitch became the second deadliest hurricane in recorded history and the most powerful to hit the Western Hemisphere in over 200 years. It caused over $500 billion in damage to Honduras, completely destroying much of the country's infrastructure and annual food crops. Nicaragua also suffered from Mitch, losing over 2,000 lives from a single landslide. Kenna. On October 25, 2002, a Category 5 hurricane named Kenna reached the city of Nayarit. It brought winds exceeding 190 km per hour, creating ocean waves as high as 20 feet. The town of San Blas was hit particularly hard, with 75% of all structures destroyed, trees uprooted, and roads, power lines and pipelines damaged. Even the boats that sought refuge in the port of San Blas didn't escape unscathed. Almost all of them were washed ashore. Surprisingly, only 4 deaths were recorded. This was largely because meteorologists had predicted Kenna's trajectory in advance, allowing the evacuation of most of San Blas's 12,000 residents. Saint Calixtus. The most powerful hurricane of the past centuries earned its nickname in honor of a well-known Roman bishop who was a martyr. From official documents, it is known that this catastrophe struck the Caribbean islands in the late 18th century. As for measuring its true strength, there were no instruments at the time, but there are eyewitness accounts. One local observer wrote that the hurricane stripped the bark off trees, indicating that the wind must have exceeded 200 miles per hour. The storm persisted for 11 days, claiming the lives of 27,000 island residents. During this nightmare, the entire English fleet located in the Caribbean basin was sunk. Bhola. A disaster of unprecedented scale struck East Pakistan and West Bengal, then part of India, on November 12, 1970. Despite being only a Category 3 cyclone on the Saffir-Simpson scale, it became one of the deadliest in human history. Cyclone Bhola formed over the Bay of Bengal on November 8 and then shifted north, gaining speed. At its peak, it hit the coastline of East Pakistan. Some populated areas were virtually pulverized. The storm surge claimed the lives of an estimated 300,000 to 500,000 people. In the hardest-hit region of the country, around Tazamuddin sub-district, more than 45% of the 167,000 population perished. Unfortunately, even with today's advanced technologies, fully tracking and controlling hurricanes remains unattainable. We can only attempt to warn the population and organize emergency evacuations, but nothing more. Thank you for watching.